But where the fuck I have to find that afterwards. Cool. Well, welcome back everyone to another episode of Move, Breathe, Live with me, with yoga. Sometimes my wife, Jenny Wren, Spirit Wren, but she's not around. Always my boy Douglas. And today I'm welcoming a chap who I've been chatting to for a little while online and kind of getting to know, which is quite nice, on the other side of the world. His chap's name is Rob Fortune. So I'm going to basically just quickly chuck it over to you, Rob, to say hello and introduce yourself, and we'll pick it up from there.
Thanks. My name is Robert Fortune, and I am one of those people who became intensely interested in breathwork several years ago. I started practicing it, and then sometime in the last 4 or 5 years, realized I knew nothing about the physiology and took a deep dive into that. And now I find myself being part of sort of a larger tribe of people who are trying to understand this and be able to share it with people in an easy to understand manner.
Nice, perfect. Well, I guess that kind of begins to come into my first question, which I'm going to come on to in a minute, but I just wanted to, we were just chatting beforehand. I thought actually I'll just stick it in the episode because from my perspective, getting to chat to you, who one of the things that, well, the way I managed to get introduced to you is there's an Instagram page called the Human Health and Performance Foundation, which is a charity, which we're going to come on to in a little bit. And you're the kind of the main guy behind that. And I'm not even sure how it started, but we kind of got chatting, sharing posts and whatever else. And you're kind of linked with Brian Mackenzie, with Tanya, and the whole kind of that kind of shift adapt-ish kind of world, i.e. bringing, as you said in your intro, like breath work and the understanding of physiology and how that affects everything into education of people. And then, so I'm super stoked because actually I honestly think that people like yourself, like Emily Hightower, like Brian, like Tanya, and all the work that you guys do at HHPF is my favorite place to go on Instagram, really. Like, as far as the information for me, it's constantly fueling thoughts and ideas for me to go off and find papers about and read and dig into more. So I'm super stoked that I've ticked off Emily. I've got you here now. I've got Rob Wilson coming in a few weeks, and who knows, maybe further down the line we'll get Brian and Tanya on as well, because might as well go for the full hand at some point. Yeah. So going from where you just said, you mentioned that you were doing breathing, you dived into it, and then you were like, shit, I don't actually really understand what's going on physiologically. Like, why is this doing this to me? So what was it that drove you into diving into breathing in the first place, I guess? And what was it that gave you that shit, I actually don't, like, something's going on within me, but I don't really know what's going on? And maybe, like, what was that moment?
So I'm going to try to make this as fairly brief, but hit the important points. I grew up moving a lot as a kid, like literally every year, different homes, actually even different countries, and living in Europe even as a kid, and then living in a Middle Eastern country that underwent a revolution when I was 13. And I mean, we're talking like, bombings, shootings, our car firebombed, stuff like that. So we were evacuated, we came back to the US, and my breathing was really jacked up. So much so that one time my own father sort of was like, what the hell's wrong with you? And I had no idea. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know how to fix it. Like, who's aware of their breathing at 13? You're a kid, right? Or much less the idea that whatever you're doing is so annoying that it's starting to feel like you might be physically threatened by it. So I had, like a whole lot of kids, I had been enthralled with the stuff in The Empire Strikes Back, Star Wars. And all I knew was that the idea of meditation or being able to control everything, like, for lack of a better word, a Jedi, that was the direction I wanted to go. And for some reason, I glommed on to, like, movies like Altered States, where he was using sensory deprivation tanks. I literally tried to figure out meditation by just sitting still. I had no idea what I was doing though, and I had no instruction. And a lot of the books back then were old New Age books, really old books. And a lot of them, I can now say, with many years hindsight, a lot of them were sort of well-meaning claptrap. Anyway, I ended up moving to Los Angeles several years later, and I found a place that had the step tanks, sensory deprivation tanks. Split tanks is what they're called now. And I had several experiences that were sort of like well past time and space, and made me sort of question everything I thought I knew about who I was and what was happening physiologically. And rather rapidly after that, my interest went from, like, on a scale of 1 to 10, it was a 4, but it suddenly was like at a 9.
Yeah.
I started doing yoga in LA when there was only 2 or 3 yoga studios in all of LA.
And it's torn through every street in there.
Yeah, it wasn't like now where you could literally find one every 4 blocks.
Yeah.
So I started doing yoga. I learned a bunch of different breathing techniques. And of course, because I was a fairly jacked up 25-year-old, I gravitated towards hyperventilation because, hey, you know, it's sort of like if regular fuel is good, why not aviation fuel?
Yeah, totally.
I always wanted to ramp everything up. And I had no understanding of why I wanted to ramp things up. And it was because I basically had been living in sympathetic dominance my entire life. I loved the breath technique. I loved the feeling of running, of moving, of taking a big in-breaths and out-breaths. I loved yoga, all of it. And I gravitated specifically towards Tumo. And within a few months of doing it, I started having like energetic experiences, like moving energy.
Mm-hmm.
The kind of stuff that sort of sounds sort of mystical and actually mythical and not really all that believable. But again, I didn't have any background in physiology. I didn't have any background in science. I didn't have anything to go by. Oftentimes I was reading New Age material that, like I said, it was a step up from comic books. It wasn't necessarily helpful. So all of these years I've been doing these breathing techniques. I've been doing yoga. I've been doing all of these practices. And I'm talking like all-night meditations, Vipassana, kind of a meditation nerd.
Yeah.
I don't know what else to call it. And the thing about being a meditation nerd is at some point I started to realize I was using meditation as an escape from the present moment.
Yeah.
Which was a, yes.
Yeah, I was going to say, which is just, I think a lot of people don't realize that's becomes it's so easy to kind of get lost in that moment. And actually, you know, rather than being in the moment, you are like just escaping it by being in the moment, if that makes like kind of a
no, totally. That was the thing about the breath work and the meditation was I was doing upwards of 3 or 4 hours a day of it.
Yeah.
And there came a moment where I realized that I wasn't necessarily, I questioned whether or not I was actually a better person for it, whether I was nicer, I was kinder,
Mm-hmm.
I was more patient. In fact, if anything, I would say I was kind of a aloof, arrogant, spiritually sort of, ironically, the thing I most wanted to become, I'd gone the furthest away from, like trying to be so spiritual.
Yeah. I think, and I've heard, you know, I've kind of never, you know, I have a meditation practice, but it's never been like yours. You know, I kind of have a 20-minute to 40-minute mantra meditation type thing, but I've listened and spoken to and heard a whole bunch of people who have said exactly what you've said. They've just, you know, they get into it so much that actually they become like this slightly, I can meditate longer than you, and because I've been doing it that I'm better than you, and I'm, you know, one plane higher than you, and all that kind of stuff. And actually you kind of, you know, they're not actually, as you've kind of pointed out, the nicer person. It's not benefiting them to be a better person within the world, to, you know, go on to help others or anything like that. It's just getting lost in in that moment of 4 hours of sitting still or something.
Yeah, that wasn't a great thing to realize either. In fact, I was able to push it out for quite a while. But the whole point of that work is that eventually it's going to come like, I've jokingly said that our shadow is like this person who shows up and then steps into our personal space and you can't get away from him.
Yeah, yeah.
Where you keep trying to back them off, but they keep stepping in a little bit further.
Yeah.
Like, it's one thing when somebody does it externally, but when you feel like there's some part of you that's actually experiencing that itself, and that you have some work to do.
Yeah.
And I stopped meditating. I literally chucked all of it out the window. And eventually I came back to it. It was a couple of years. But like I said, I really questioned the whole thing. I questioned my own arrogance. I questioned my own thinking that I knew something other people didn't. And I had to really get to the bottom of the anger. I was also sober at that point for at least a decade.
Right.
I had quit drinking. I was doing a 12-step program. And that was another huge component of it, was if what you're doing isn't actually working, then what is it?
Yeah, yeah.
I came back to it again a few years later, vastly more humbled. And approaching it with sort of a beginner's mind. I threw out everything I thought I knew. I had to.
Yeah.
And when I sat, I just sat. If I did 20 minutes of meditation, I wouldn't think about it too much before I started it. And when I was done, largely a few minutes afterwards, I'd kind of let it go and move into whatever I was doing next.
Yeah, yeah.
Something new, like being in the present moment with whatever you're doing.
Yes. Yeah.
I thought I was being mindful. I thought I was being spiritual all the time. I thought I was kind of like this spiritual,
just constantly there.
Yeah, I'm constantly there. I'm mindful all the time. I'm hyper aware. I'm this, I'm that. And a lot of it, I think, was actually a tremendous amount of fear about being present with right now with what was going on with whatever it was.
Yeah.
So I don't mean for that to sound like a cautionary tale, but I suspect that may be more realistic for an awful lot of people.
I think I think with meditation, there's almost that two sides of things, isn't there? There's almost I can't do it because there's too much going on in my brain. Yeah, I can't sit, I can't meditate, blah, blah, blah. And then there's almost like the flip side, which is almost like where you went, and it was kind of like, it actually completely takes over their entire life, and actually they don't end up living anything. So you've got people who are so, if you like, sympathetically dominant, as you kind of mentioned, that they can't remotely stop. And then there's almost the other people who are, which is kind of what I was going to come on to a little bit, is like almost that type A, like, I'm going to fucking do this better than anyone's ever done it before. And, you know, actually losing their life to something which is not making them any better a person, and actually just maybe detracting from their ability to kind of empathize to whatever else with people, because they're just, well, I can do this for 3 hours. So
yeah, that was me.
Yeah,
you just described it perfectly. It was like if your spiritual path gets in the way of you being an actual human being,
yeah,
that can coexist with other people and people want around, then it might be time for a reboot or a rethink, or to let go of your belief system.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of the things I was listening to, I don't know if you've heard of him, know him or not, but Raghunath Kappo, so Ray Kappo, he was like the singer of Shelter and Youth of Today back in the 80s and 90s, hardcore bands. But he was kind of saying that kind of thing, which I kind of do go with, like, with spiritual beings in like a human body. But it's all very well having that idea. But if you're so, like, your spiritual, like, if you're a spiritual asshole, then you're not actually you're not on your spiritual path. You know what I mean? I think you've completely missed that whole door, and actually you're so caught up with your ego, you kind of, you haven't got on your spiritual path at all, or you've stepped off it pretty damn quick.
It's a diversion, yeah, and it's a diversion, and it's like the best thing that ever happened to me also.
Yeah.
Because when I came back to meditation, when I sat down one day, and within 10 minutes, I'm going to stop here and say one of the things that fascinates me about meditation is if I stop like I did for a few years, or I take even a break for a week, because I don't have a rigid practice anymore. It's
Yeah.
not I don't do that rigidity of a 24/7 schedule with anything anymore. When I sat down to do it, I was suddenly felt more at home than I ever had before. And I always feel that way when I meditate. And one of the things I'd want to say to somebody listening to this is don't be too hard on yourself if you miss a day, a week, a month, 2 months, a year, is that you will almost feel greeted by it when you come back to it.
Yeah, no, I'm the same. Like I went through probably 2.5 years of, every morning rigidly at the same time, get up, meditate before going to work as a nurse and all that kind of things. And then that all kind of trailed away at points. And actually, when I come back to it, and it's not a daily thing as part of my practice anymore. Like there's other bits and pieces which are probably more suiting my life right now and my journey. But when I do come back to it, it is kind of 15-20 minutes to half an hour just sitting comfortably on some cushions, and just, for me, it's mantra chanting, as I say, but it's just bloody lovely just to not feel like the urge and the need to be, I have to fucking do this, because otherwise like my brain's going to explode, and everyone tells me how good meditation is and blah blah blah. And
what you just said was perfect, because if you end up more charged up about doing it than not, like would you say to somebody who is in sympathetic dominance or a certain amount of stress, great, let's meditate now?
Yeah, exactly.
Like it's kind of like, it doesn't work.
No.
And it might be better to go take a walk. It might be better to eat something. It might be better to put on some music and blow it out that way.
Yeah. And that's exactly one of the points that me and Jen, my wife, had. Like, I can't even remember what brought it up, but it was kind of like, for me, obviously I spend a lot of time doing breath work, and I like to completely try to live it and just try to feel into things and embody myself through my breath and bits and pieces, and Jen does her breath work, but at the same time, it's not really her. And for her, and we've kind of discussed, and it'll probably be on some of our little mini podcasts, but it's the idea of like brain and body doing separate things. Her brain says, just chill out, you'll be all right. Like, it's all cool. But her body, like, because at the time she'll be so sympathetic dominant, she can't there's this mismatch, and she can't like disconnect. And for her, cranking her music up and like screaming along in a car or having a dance, whatever, like that helps her like just burn it off a little bit, and then she can reset from there. And I think it's so, and I'm probably one of the people who's guilty of it, and as much as anyone, of we almost make people feel like, well, if they're not breathing, if they're not doing breath work, they're not meditating, then they're missing out on everything. And actually there's a million ways to skin a cat and all that kind of saying. But one of the things I did want to just briefly mention, like you said, is if you're really sympathetically dominant, you wouldn't say, come on now, let's go and meditate. And I'm sure you're getting them over there too, but I'm seeing an increasing amount of bits on like the news websites and stuff saying, oh, meditation, can be bad for you and blah, blah, blah. And, it could be causing people to have mental health problems and whatever else. And from my perspective, that's almost like people trying to sit down and meditate when they're clearly not in a headspace to do it. If you're already sympathetically dominant and then you're trying to sit down and force yourself to meditate, is that really going to put you into a better headspace?
I've seen some of the same articles you're talking about. And I've also seen breathwork instructors who literally will get on camera or in front of an audience say, I can't meditate. As if they're the final arbiter about what they're capable of or not.
Yeah.
And I think to some extent, a lot of that goes with what we were just discussing, the sympathetic dominance and the this is where it gets to me, this is where the conversation gets really interesting, is I was working with a private client last week, and we were talking about, she says, well, how do I get down from sympathetic dominance? And I said, the first thing is knowing what triggers it. Like when you're going to put yourself in a situation or around a person or in an environment that you already know sets you off. And she said, okay, I can do that. But she says, but how do I bring myself down? And I said, it's not likely you're going to be able to when you're in the situation itself. And where we ended up talking with, because this person is also in a recovery program for drugs and alcohol. And this is a very successful type A person, like somebody you might know from film and TV. What I found myself explaining to her was, I said, one of the reasons we sometimes stay in sympathetic dominance is it takes us out of the present moment. I said, if there's something you're dealing with, if there's something that's right here on your chest, a fear of something, a dread of something, being afraid of saying something to somebody because you might hurt their feelings, or you might have to just tell the truth, that if you're deeply burdened, sympathetic dominance, and the other side of it, the parasympathetic freeze, is sort of it's a place to hide.
Yeah.
And I was surprised when I said it, because it wasn't something intellectual, it was something I'd observed and noticed with myself, was that if we describe that middle ground, that like autonomic nervous system, that nice sort of middle space, like just for fun, we say 1 to 10, right?
Yeah.
And in here, 4 to 7, this is almost like a parenthesis. And inside there is like, what's your stuff? What is it you're dealing with? What is it you're afraid of? Or more even better said, what is it you're imagining and you're letting the fear of it run your life?
Yeah. And I think that's probably one of the biggest things that going on these days, isn't it? Like most people, their anxiety and the thing that crippling. I mean, I get a lot of people comment or message me about this, and it's that inability to, almost like the parentheses are dragged in so much that they're constantly in this place of massive fear of something which is never going to happen, but they have no idea how to get out of that felt place, that, as you say, that place in their heart, which is constantly always there. It's easier to kind of almost live that sympathetic dominance and think about cleaning and doing this and doing that and whatever else, rather than actually finding that thing which is keeping them there, which is keeping them from avoiding that truth.
Yeah, and I think that's probably the original basis behind a great deal of the oldest known practices, contemplative practices of meditation, of breath work, is getting somebody back into sort of a physiological middle ground where they can breathe, they can think, they're in the present moment. When you're in the presence of somebody like that. And we all equally know when we're in the presence of somebody that we feel like we want to give a hug to.
Yeah.
Or conversely, when they're in like flat affect. And that's a sort of a clinical term to describe it, where somebody's almost numb.
Yeah.
And they say that they pretend like nothing bothers them. They're not reacting to anything. And they come off a little bit like Spock in Star Trek.
Yeah, yeah.
Like disconnected from their own emotions. I mean, that's the whole thing about meditation, and particularly breath work, is so many of us say, I feel like something's missing, or I feel like I'm not connected to my own heart. And I don't know if you've had this experience, but if you've ever been working with a client and you see them drop into their own heart,
yeah,
and then they jump right back out again.
Yeah, it's almost like they go there and then it's kind of like, oh shit.
That's exactly it. I had a client a few months ago where we were less than a minute into a breathing practice, and I saw their face turning red, and the eyes were suddenly tracking back and forth, like on high alert. You couldn't keep them closed anymore, and the eyes were kind of going back and forth. And we were doing this over Zoom, by the way. And he was laying on the floor, And he said, I can't do this right now. He said, I just can't do this. I'm sorry. But like I said, we were less than a minute into it. And it was, I give everybody, including myself, a pass during this like last 14 months because we were all cooped up at home. But it was the thing of what is that there that's sitting there that as soon as we did a little bit of breathing and started to bring him in, he came into it. I saw him come into it. And as soon as he did, he bounced right back out. He took himself out.
Yeah.
You see that because of the career you have.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I was going to say, you kind of see that with quite a few people sort of in nursing as well, sort of from that background.
Yeah. And it's funny. I feel like I'm not really talking about breathwork much, but.
So it's not really like, it's from my perspective, I'm not too fussed about like talking about breathwork. I'm just more talking like, I think as you guys always say, and like, well, I try to say as well, but like breathwork's one tiny little part of the bigger picture. And from my perspective, I'm happy just to dive in and like, what can we discover and, you know, maybe spark some little thoughts in people's brains as they kind of go, oh yeah, that's me. And, you know, maybe a breathwork part will be useful for them, maybe something else. And
Well, thank you. Okay, great. So one of the things with all of my clients is that usually the first week we work, there's always trepidation about what are we going to do? Do I have to breathe? And it's like, you know, they're almost like, I don't know, am I breathing wrong? Or like there's a certain amount of nervousness or feeling like that breathing is suddenly now a performance kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so the first week we don't do any breath work. We just talk and we get acquainted and we kind of lower down the shields a little bit so to create a certain back and forth, create an intimacy.
Yeah.
And also so that I feel like they can express themselves or say, well, this is what's going on.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to pretend I'm a therapist or bringing them into it like a therapeutic container, but creating like that trust, that intimacy, or the ability for them to attach or feel comfortable with me in the same room.
Yeah.
It's huge.
Yeah.
So I don't teach anybody hyperventilation techniques.
That's got to be that was one of the things I was going to bring up at some point was the your way, because Emily Hightower and I discussed it in episode before this, in fact. But yeah, I was definitely wanting to discuss with you a little bit about hyperventilation and your thoughts, feelings. I mean, I have a bit of an idea about this anyway, but you know, I think it'd be kind of interesting, especially from this perspective, as you're saying with clients and, you know, not teaching it. And so why would you not teach it?
So one of the first things I do in terms of, besides just watching somebody's breathing while we're talking, because you can, as you know, you can learn an enormous amount. The way some people sort of guppy in air like a fish, like,
yeah,
or the way they'll pause or do that kind of nothing's moving.
Yeah.
The reason I wouldn't teach a hyperventilation technique is because when I start, we will do the control pause like Patrick McCown talks about, and like they do with shift adapt, where it's 3 inhales, 3 exhales, and then we time it. I want to see where that control pause is, because if it's exceptionally short, what I don't want to do in the first few sessions or even in the first few months is say, great, let's work on that. And then immediately ramp them up into a profound sympathetic dominant state, which in plain English means stressed, anxiety, and in some cases, people who are terrified and quite possibly should even have like a therapist or somebody on hand present also in case it really goes into the weeds.
Yeah.
Because it happens to people.
Yeah. I know Patrick McKeown said the same thing in one of his. He tried to get him to unblock his nose and just doing some simple breath holds at the bottom of his exhale, just sort of 5 rounds of kind of 4-second breath holds. And like the guy ended up going to A&E like afterwards.
That's exactly it. And like the example I gave a few minutes ago about the friend who was 40 seconds in, we were doing a very slow, I had actually modified hyperventilation. And when I say modified, that's too big a word. I asked him to do a long, slow inhale.
Mm-hmm.
He said, how long? And I said, as long as you can make it. I want you to go very slowly. And so we did a long, slow inhale, and then we did a very brief second inhale.
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
was trying to get him to open up his chest and lungs, but it wasn't putting it on the launch pad and launching it. It was very slow. And I said, I want you to take a second, just give 2 or 3 seconds. Then I want you to slowly exhale it. You can do it through your mouth or your nose. And that was what brought it on with him.
Yeah.
Like I said, I could see the immediate calm, but as soon as he dropped in there, now some people aren't even going to go there. You do that breathing with them, and the level of anxiety they have about trying to get their inhale right, or their pause, or their exhale right is enough.
Or how long, or how hard, or how,
am I breathing right?
Yeah.
You take somebody who's already filled with anxiety and you tell them they're breathing wrong, and maybe they don't have a great sort of interoceptive sense of like what's going on.
Yeah.
They just feel like all they hear is, I'm doing it wrong. I'm wrong.
Yeah.
So like I'm going to be seeing a client today in a few hours. And one of the great things about where I live in Southern California is we have this thing called June gloom. What it means is it's basically foggy all day long till 2 or 3. And then it burns off and it's sort of a miracle. But it's a great time to go for a walk during the day because it keeps the heat out. It's pleasant to breathe. You're not getting the sun burned down on you. Today, we're going to go for a walk, and I'm going to introduce the idea of like 3 steps on an inhale.
Yeah.
1 step pause, and then a 3-step exhale. And for this person who also rides horses, that we want to go with this idea of like, this is something you can do all day long. Whether you're walking around in the house, you're on horseback, or even in your car.
Yeah.
As opposed to 99% of the time where if you're in a car, you probably shouldn't be doing any kind of breath technique whatsoever.
Yeah, yeah. Let's get that out there. Let's definitely get that one out there.
Let's not do that. Yeah. So like I said, this is what I'm going to be doing with them today. We're going to go for this walk, and we're going to work on this cadenced walk where we just extend it out a little bit and maybe slow our pace. And I'm not going to say to this person, okay, let's walk a little slower. I'm just going to entrain. When we walk together, human beings, we tend to entrain with each other.
Yeah.
Move in sync. In fact, there's an Irish neuroscientist who wrote a book. His name is Shane O'Mara. The book is called In Praise of Walking.
Okay.
And he wrote some, I'll send you the links to it later.
Yeah, definitely do that, and I'll add it into the show notes.
But he wrote about the entrainment of walking and the fact that the 2 people walking together, that's how hours go by. That's how our hearts entrain. And they've done all this in labs. Watch the way physiologically, the way we'll match each other's stride, the way we walk. The fact that you can eat, you can talk, you can carry things. I mean, realistically, you could give birth, stop for a few hours, and pick up the kid and start walking again.
Yeah.
It's such an innate part of who we are. So using the walk as a part of working with breathing. Well, the biggest thing I got from Brian Mackenzie, when I had first met him in 2014, maybe 2015, I went down and did a day-long XPT thing with him and Laird Hamilton. Mm-hmm. And I was kind of in awe of like Laird at the time. I had the fanboy thing. And we jumped right into the breathwork stuff. So bitching, right? And I sort of connected with Brian, and we were talking about it. And at the time, I didn't have any idea I would ever have a conversation with him again. I was just sort of curious about it. And a couple of years later, I think I sent him a note or something when he broke his neck or broke the bones in his neck and had to have some vertebra fused. But I kept him like a little tiny bit of communication. And then I went ahead and did Art of Breath in LA. And Tanya and I had done a breathwork certification with a teacher in LA. We've talked about that.
Yeah, yeah.
So Tanya and I already knew each other, and they were asking for help with HHPF, the Health and Human Performance Foundation, and I volunteered. And it was one of the few things I felt like I could get behind because it was a nonprofit. The entire goal was to promote the understanding and the science behind breathing. And we didn't have to get into the battleground of different spiritual groups, gurus, or what I like to call branded techniques.
Yep.
All fighting it out.
Yeah. We've got a few ideas. We've got an idea of who a few of those are.
Well, and this is how I'm going to actually sidestep that entire part of that. Several years ago, I did Jeet Kune Do in LA. It was the martial art that was kind of founded by Bruce Lee, and I did it for a few years. And one night, our instructor, who had trained with Dan Inosanto, was his personal assistant for years. He told us this great anecdote about like old style martial arts versus JKD, about how there had been it was like it was largely Chinese parade up in Toronto, cultural parade. And all of the different groups, particularly the martial arts schools, the businesses, the schools, everybody had little spots in the parade, but the martial arts guys, they had to separate because the year before, they had all kind of crashed into each other, and they were kicking and slapping like a bunch of little girls. and he said that's the thing with it, is he says, when kind of like when Brian talks about that, you know, if this doesn't work when you're on fire, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
That all these guys did was train martial arts, but when push came to shove, literally, and guys who literally were spending their life training to not react to like small scale shit, that
just lost it.
Yeah, and they were kicking and they were slapping and they were clawing and they looked like a bunch of 6-year-old girls. and I'm tying that to how I feel about the way breathwork is sort of balkanizing a little bit.
Yeah.
Into it all has to be slow, it all has to be fast, or you know, you can literally solve any physiological problem by hyperventilating.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or getting in an ice bath every single day.
Yeah.
By the way, isn't realistic for people with dogs or kids or a career. It's just not happening. It's literally exclusively in the realm of fitness dudes.
Yeah. Or biohackers, as some of them like to call themselves, which I fucking hate that term, but there we go. That's just me.
You know, the only thing I'll say about biohacking is I kind of liken them to the alchemists of 400 or 500 years ago, where if you're trying to outrun death, then you should look at what it is you're so afraid of about it.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. I agree with that. Very much so.
400 years ago, these guys spent their entire lives dedicated to trying to figure out how to outpace, how to live longer, how to live twice as long, how to turn lead into gold. That, yeah, we all want to live longer. We all want to look better. We all want a lot of money. And it's almost like the alchemists of old, like, became the biohackers now. And they're the same people who oftentimes will come at you with the pithy phrases where it's like, wait, did you just get that out of the secret?
Yeah.
Like somehow you don't have all of that great stuff.
Yeah.
It's your own fault. And I have to apologize for the dog bark.
Oh, don't worry. Mine will all kick off when they come back. They've gone for a walk. They'll all be noisy. So everyone's used to it by now.
So that's kind of where I leave biohacking. I had my phase with it. It didn't last long. I noticed that it can be very expensive. There's very little science behind it. And a lot of the guys who live the biohacker lifestyle, it seems like when they get hit with something real, they fall just like everyone else does.
Yeah, 100%. I kind of feel that from what, I mean, I don't actually know. I live in Suffolk. We don't really get a lot of biohackers around here, but from what I see online and the people I have come across, it's my take on it. And also some of that stuff around biohacking, I kind of feel is some of it is just common sense as to how, as a human, we should, and yes, you know, as a animal race, we have become very distanced from our nature, as like Brian and Rob and whatever else would say, and actually just, you know, taking a cold shower every now and again, or, you know, jumping in a cold river if you're going for a walk or whatever, you know, you should be able to do stuff like that without it completely destroying you. But, you know, I was talking to a yoga teacher friend. I think it might have even been Rob, who's episode 1 on this podcast. And we were basically saying, you know, how asana is the preparation for pranayama, which is the preparation for meditation in the 8 limbs of yoga. And actually, you know, we're now at a stage as a human race where we're actually needing to do preparation for moving, to prepare. We need to prepare to move, to prepare us to sit, to prepare us to, you know, we're actually needing another practice almost before we get into a yoga asana practice, because we're so shit at moving that actually when we jump into a yoga practice, we almost like break ourselves there. And so, yeah, it's kind of, it was just a little thought me and Robert discussed, I think.
I did, you know, I've been in and around yoga for 20 years. And at some point I walked away from it completely because I noticed that I wasn't physically very strong. At one point, God, I hate admitting this, but at one point I had the most amazing yoga practice. I had incredible flexibility, but I couldn't do 5 push-ups. And I'll just tell it. So I started training at a gym that was owned by a gentleman who'd been in the SEAL teams. And part of his assessment when I first came in was he wanted to see my push-ups. And
you did a brilliant 1 push-up and then started losing it after that.
I did probably 1 or 2 good because I was scared shitless, because he was looking at me like I was some sort of lab specimen. Like, let's see what he can do. And on the 4th one, he was just like, stop. And my arms were wobbling. I was already sweating. And he said, we got to fix that. And then he put me on the rower. And that wasn't so hot either. By the way, I was mouth breathing the whole time. And this was the point at which I began to question everything I knew in terms of yoga, breathing, meditation, because how is it he could put me on a rower, a concept 2, and in 10 minutes, not even going close to all out, but just kind of its middle pace, I had mouth wide open and I was sucking in air. I looked like a fish.
Yeah.
Like, and I started to question, and I started to do a lot of reading. And that was when I reconnected with Brian and everybody also. And the hardest thing for me to admit, even now, was that it was the thing I had missed. It was right in front of me the entire time. And everything I was interested in, meditation, breath work, because again, nobody cares if you're over breathing when you're just like sympathetic dominant. Literally, it's all over breathing, right? That's the point.
Yeah.
But when you try and slow it down and you can't, or when your gas exchange is so bad that you're literally gasping for air on a slight incline of a hill, like,
something needs to be addressed.
Something needs to be addressed. And I suspect this is more the case for most people.
Yeah.
You know, I told you before we started recording, I spent the weekend in LA, and we were walking up and down hills. I was with a family member. And at one point, we'd walked 3 or 4 miles, and I looked over, and it's strange because, you know, my sister and I look we look alike. But I looked over, and she had the mouth wide open. She was gasping for air. Her nostrils were flaring. She couldn't get enough air in. And I said, you know, I hate to do this, but I'm going to point out something. Remember how I told you 2 years ago I started working on my nasal breathing? I said, do you see how I'm not breathing hard? Not at all. Not even close. And I said, you don't even have to do anything different. Just start practicing nasal breathing, and I swear to you, it's going to change.
Yeah.
You need to get your body used to breathing through the nose again. And granted, it probably wasn't the greatest time to bring that up when she's standing there on a corner like,
rather
had to,
sympathetically dominant.
yeah, well, exactly, but I had to take advantage of the moment and say, look, I said, this is the thing is it's going to take you 10 minutes to recover from this. I said, but if we just walk that way for 40 minutes where you're breathing through it, sympathetic dominant, I said, part of this whole thing with like the alarming skyrocketing of blood sugar issues, pre-diabetic, type 2 diabetic, is that in the wild, there's not a single creature on earth that spends an hour in sympathetic dominance mouth breathing.
Yeah.
And when we say mouth breathing, in that, for the purposes of people viewing, what we're also saying here is that when you're breathing that hard, you're actually burning glucose. You're not using air as your primary fuel system. The anaerobic breathing, glucose, is designed to, kind of like an afterburner, it's designed to help you get away from something or chase after something or to get to safety. That's what fight or flight, literally, that's what it's all about. But that the other 99.9% of your day, you should be working at aerobic breathing and having a good capacity for it.
Aerobic being, just for those of you not sure, like in the presence of oxygen. So like,
Anna.
do you know what I mean? Not breathing so hard that you're blowing out of your ass. It should be quiet, soft, calm, gentle, subtle breaths, essentially. Just not really being able to hear yourself breathe would be a good place to start.
If I said to you, I'm gonna give you get to own 2 automobiles. One of them gets 150 miles to the gallon. The other one gets about 3. The car that gets you 3 miles to the gallon is like the James Bond, the Batmobile, it's all engine and it's all power. That's anaerobic. The Prius, or whatever your little hybrid is, that one that can literally go all day on almost nothing.
Yeah.
That's aerobic. And
Yeah.
that has to do with the way your body's designed to work. So what we really want to do is improve by nasal breathing, by things as simple as mouth taping. What we really want to do is we want to improve your aerobic capacity and your aerobic threshold for when you switch over from aerobic to anaerobic. Because if you practice over here, just breathing through your nose and the metabolic efficiency of it, that's going to translate to gains so that you're not actually going to have to access the anaerobic functions any more often. And when you do, you will be much more efficient at it. It won't smoke you.
Yeah.
Unless, of course, that's what you're trying to do.
Yeah. So with that then, what I'd like to, because it's mental, we're already like nearly 50 minutes in, but what I'd kind of like to round this into, I guess, is the work that you guys, and like with this aerobic / constant sympathetic dominance, fight and flighty type thing, you guys over at HHPF are doing some charity, is that the right word? Yeah, there's a charity thing going on for it, but you're doing some research in and around school kids like, is it just girls or is it all kids? I can't quite remember, about basically trying to look at the way that doing some simple breathing work with school children can actually help them like not be such a stress. Because I mean, I think we're all fairly aware that this coming future generation of kids are having a pretty hard time dealing with these things, and the stress and pressure that comes with social media and how I look and how I feel and how I do this and how I do that, and oh my god, I need to get all my A grades because otherwise I'm not going to be able to do this and that, and the brain goes crazy. And obviously there's been a bit of preliminary work done that I think I've seen Tanya talk about and Brian and you guys post about, but can you just kind of go into a little bit of this, because I think this is potentially some crazy, stupid, important work which probably needs to be highlighted more. And for probably parents at home who are listening to this, give them an idea that perhaps if their kids are really struggling and perhaps being pain in the ass because they're constantly stressed, perhaps there is some simple things that might be useful for them.
Certainly.
Thanks.
We're literally halfway through a study, meaning we've already done the study with the kids. It was an 8-week long program, It was done in Aspen, Colorado. It was also with one of the few schools that were open during COVID, which that was a huge part of this. Kids who were actually coming into class every day. And it wasn't like they were coming to class and breathing for an hour. It was literally, I think, 5 minutes of breathing. But it was along with instruction to teach them and to explain to them what was happening physiologically and what this could do. And that this intervention point, and you had mentioned, you asked me about whether it was for girls or boys. It was for girls and boys, but this intervention point of catching kids at an age before puberty hits.
Yeah.
And then they're sort of captive to a growth spurt that is for lack of a better word, is one of the most harrowing times of anyone's life.
Yeah.
Girls where they experience a great deal of anxiety once they start having their period, because of the physiology behind like estrogen and progesterone. So this study, the data's been collected. The research team is actually handling that now, and then it's going to have to undergo peer review before it's even published.
Yeah.
All of this costs money. So we're raising our own funds and doing fundraisers to pay for it. The money we raise actually goes literally to the research people, the highly skilled people we need to make sure that this study is validated, and then we can publish it and offer it. The next step after that is taking this material and also a lot of the other material that we've collected and creating a program that can be introduced in schools, like a turnkey program where you hand somebody you don't necessarily have to be a breathwork instructor in order to take kids through this program. The idea is to offer this at little or no cost and to make it available to everybody. And to not also have the to not have this tied necessarily to a specific technique or school of thought. But to strip out the branded techniques and make it available to everybody.
Amazing. That's like, as I say, I think I have had so many people, especially in the last kind of couple of years, the more I've kind of, I've been using breath work throughout my time as a nurse to try and help cannulate people who didn't like having, bloods taken, whatever else. But the more I've kind of begun to bring this into my field of work, I guess, is the amount of parents who do kind of come to me and say, their kids are like, would you do a breathing thing for kids? Would I do whatever else? Because their kids are all struggling. That most of them are already becoming mouth breathers. They're already, they're really young and they're already getting anxious about nothing. And actually, I think this is the kind of thing which is so key to get out there. And I think, that's kind of pretty amazing stuff. With that, then obviously, we're kind of fortunately coming up to our hour mark, but you've kind of given away, so you've already kind of said a few bits and pieces which I think are already, which if you I didn't clock the time we said it, probably about half an hour in, but you were talking about the client you're going to go take a walk with and you're going to do 1, 2, 3 hold, 1, 2, 3 out, whatever else. But have you got any super simple, easy techniques which either people can do for themselves, maybe a parent can use for their kids, or whatever else, something which you find is accessible to all, or to most, let's say, because not everything is going to affect everyone in the same way, but just something that perhaps people can take away to help downshift away from sympathetic dominance to perhaps just introduce themselves in a non-scary way to breathing or whatever else. Got anything you can chuck at us?
Yeah, no, I do. And it's simply to breathe through your nose as many hours a day as you possibly can. When you start out with something like actually practicing something that seems as obvious as nasal breathing, I've seen more than a few people go, really, that's your advice? Are you kidding me? But when you start to practice it and you realize the amount of time you spend breathing through your mouth, or even something as simple as like how often you're speaking unconsciously and becoming more aware of it. Something as simple as when you start nasal breathing and you start to notice the downshift occur, you may also notice that there will be times where you will gulp air, or you'll suddenly drop into the calm, and you'll immediately like feel like you need to breathe more. What I want to say is take note of that. When you feel like you need to breathe, remember that your body has enough oxygen. And that little bit of panic you might be feeling, or that little bit of I can't breathe, that occurs when you slow down your breathing slightly, that if you just pause for a moment, walk a little slower, or even stand still if you have to, let it pass. And what you're going to notice is that it's largely a reaction. It's a physiological reaction that actually doesn't have anything to do with what's actually happening. That it may be that the anxiety created its own pattern that you're now responding to, and that you can change that. The 2 or 3 minutes of this kind of breathing can immediately alter your physiology, your blood pH, actually the whole way you see the day or the world. But that the initial transition period for some people can be a little bit difficult because, like I said, if you've become so identified with your own breathing pattern that it feels like you're suddenly suffocating when you're breathing through your nose, that is largely some stored up anxiety, and it's going to work its way out as you breathe.
Yeah.
But to trust yourself, breathe, go a little slower, be kind to yourself, be patient with yourself. There's no finish line with this. That the benefits of practicing something this simple on a walk, or when you're walking with somebody else, you know what? Let them talk. Be silent. The good breathing also will tune you into the present moment, and you'll become a better listener. One of the things about sympathetic dominance is instead of listening to people, we're very often like literally waiting to pounce and start talking. Because again, our motor's revved up. We're always ready to talk. I talk to people's ear off. And
me too.
It's a hard one for me to acknowledge. And
me too.
I recently had a conversation with an ex-girlfriend I'm on wonderful terms of. And she says, I don't know what's happened. She says, you're a lot better of a listener. It's a little bittersweet.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I credit that to that process of the change in my breathing.
Amazing. Well, there you go. I've kind of said it to you guys, but Robert's probably far cleverer than I am, and has been doing this for even longer than I have. So you can listen to him instead. Thank you so much for being on. I've got a whole heap more questions that I would love to ask you. So, I mean, literally, we touched on little bits and pieces, which I'd love to have you back on at some point and discuss. You mentioned menstrual cycles with the progesterone and estrogen with, women and whatever else. I'd love to discuss those more, but that is probably another hour at least on its own. So it might well be that, in a little couple of months' time, we'll arrange another one of these and we'll dive deep into that one, because I'm sure there's going to be many people who, once they listen to this and hear that we're going to talk about that, be super stoked on understanding how the menstrual cycle can have its whole own effects on your breathing and your stress levels and the way in which you cope. And actually, if men, you're listening, it might even educate you as to how to treat and be a little bit more patient with your better halves.
Yeah, absolutely.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for this. It's been incredible, and I've absolutely loved just being able to sit here and listen to you talk and go back and forth a little bit. So thank you so much. We will give this an end now. So again, thanks so much, Robert.
Thank you so much for having me, Wibbs.
No, my pleasure.